Barbara, for stopping in and talking to us.
Glad to be here.
You were instrumental in the opening of NCTE's DC office. Can you talk about the genesis of that office and why it was opened and the expectations?
NCTE realized that it would be very important to have a national presence. In that, NCTE was beginning to think that rather than looking inward all the time, it was important to look outward and to represent what was important to NCTE and what NCTE hoped would be established and developed in both local conditions and national conditions. And of course, Washington, D.C., head of the federal government, Department of Education, Houses on the Hill, but also many of the national associations. And to have ongoing relationships with them was important as well. So when NCTE was going to open the office, it came to me, and I was already in DC with the American Association for Higher Education. And so I had built some alliances, I had done some work on the Hill, and it was a wonderful opportunity to come back to my discipline. So I could help NCTE start establishing some of those relationships, building some of those alliances, making our presence known on the Hill for what we really stood for. We kind of had a reputation of a certain kind of perspective, but that wasn't where we were right then. So being able to be realistic about where NCTE was and the vision that NCTE had took a DC office, and we were able to begin to develop that right from the beginning.
Alliances and collaborations are really important to you. Talk about how you establish those and why you.
Alliances are essential. That's just it. You can't, as an individual group, have the kind of influence you'd like to have. Interestingly, other associations also agree with that, so they're ready for alliance building as well. And so we would find a topic that cause that we were interested in and look for those groups that really did want to speak to that as well. And out of that developed something called the Alliance for Literacy, which is a group that works together, goes to the Hill together, has briefings together, and has had more of an influence than NCTE could have by itself. And so there are those kinds of alliances. There are other alliances that are important when we're trying to decide what we want to spend our research time on, when we want to do investigations with our members. We don't need to be redundant. We can be supportive, or we can be novel and contribute to others. So the alliances are built for several different reasons, but they're absolutely essential.
Now, what type of issues did you focus on in the beginning, and what kind of issues would you like to see NCTE focus on now?
At the beginning, it was the time that the whole area of literacy was being rediscovered, I'd say, or at least discovered in its full meaning. And there was a potential for legislation. It eventually was called the Learn Bill. And many of the staff persons didn't feel that they had the expertise in the background to define what needed to be in that. So we had a lot of debating, both within our alliance actually, and with legislative staff, about what needed to be in there, what terms meant as we started to use them. When we first used literacy, for instance, I remember that was interpreted as reading. And we worked and worked so that every time we saw the word reading in a draft of a bill, we wrote "and writing." Every time we talked with a staff person who just started talking about reading, we said, well, and here's how this gets worked out with writing. And I remember one time when Bethany Little, who was on the Health Committee, a senior staff person on the Health Committee, came to talk at our Advocacy Day. She started talking along and she said, literacy, reading. And she said, oh, no, I mean reading and writing. And she looked over at me and grinned. So she was incorporating that in her knowledge base. And so that was very important. We helped to get the words developmentally appropriate in and help define those. We looked at organizational conditions. We looked at continuing professional learning. I remember doing many versions of the definition of literacy coach so that it could be understandable. Had been difficult, quite difficult, and understandably so for people who'd never worked with literacy coaches. So a lot of that help with language and very specific things to go into that legislation took some of my early time.
Talk about the genesis of NCLE, the expectations of what you hope to see with that.
Sure. Well, we said just a minute ago, of course, that alliances are important. And as you're looking at a movement, when you want major change, you have to have lots of people working toward that movement. And we realized as we were looking at literacy across subject areas, across grade levels, that there were different groups that worked on that and from different perspectives. And so NCTE went after a grant. We fortunately were invested in by the Ball Foundation to begin the National Center for Literacy Education. And stakeholders were invited into that group who really wanted to support this movement. They support it in different ways. Sometimes it is simply identifying something they already do, but saying this connects with what our goals are for this movement. Sometimes it's learning with each other what we're currently doing and saying, wow, we could do that even better together. Or if we got together, we could do something in addition to what we're doing. And occasionally it is something new we discover. And the only way we can do it is if we do it together. So NCLE has different purposes and it works in different ways, but it's an important coalition of stakeholder groups, from subject area groups to professional learning groups to some foundations, all working together toward the movement for building capacity for literacy learning.
Talk about how Advocacy Day got started and what it was like in those early days. And is there anything you'd like to see done differently?
Advocacy Day is important on the federal level in that teacher voices need to be heard, and not just represented, but heard. And so having teachers come to DC and being willing to prepare in looking at a particular topic and thinking about, with their rhetorical background, how can I make this understandable for people who aren't in the classroom? And how can I represent what I do? So it's very important to have teacher voices heard both on the Hill and in the department. And Advocacy Day gives an opportunity for that. Of course, one day a year is not going to do as much good as a lot of activity. And so some of the activity that can go on during the year is really important. And NCTE is learning more and more and practicing more and more that day to day and month to month important kinds of advocacy work.
You were also instrumental in the Policy Analyst initiative. Can you tell me how that got started, what you hope to see with that?
Sure. One of the things I just mentioned was that federal is not enough, that state's very important, and this is more and more essential as a lot of educational decisions get made at the state level. We obviously have members all over the country, and so we have asked our members, would you want to take the responsibility to be attuned to what's going on in your own state? What are issues that you think other members ought to know about? And not just report them, but analyze them. Think about them in terms of NCTE goals, look at our position statements, look at what we're working on up on the Hill, and think about what people would need to do if they decided to act. Our policy analysts are not activists themselves, can be on their own, but not on behalf of NCTE. They're activists in the sense only of analysis. And I don't mean that only as slighting, but as a focus. And they help then our members to be smarter about what they might do if they want to speak to a school board about something, or they want to talk to a legislator about something, or they want to write a letter to a federal legislator about some conditions in their own state.
Thank you. Are there issues that you would like to see NCTE address today?
Well, I think NCTE is doing a good job on helping to define literacy, on looking at what organizational conditions in schools influence literacy. I think we need to both generate more evidence and represent the evidence we have of what works in ways that are understandable to those people who are making decisions. It's hard if you are a school board member who's been elected and you have to watch for the community monies that get invested in schools. How do you know whether it's better to give teachers some free time during the school day, free in terms of not being directly interacting with students at that time, and give them time to work together around the kind of learning that they're planning, to interpret data that they have about student success or lack of success? How do you know if it's a good investment to give teachers that time? We need to do more and more in getting the evidence in a form, and we know that one's true, evidence into a form that our school board members can understand, or our state representatives can understand, or our legislative staff on the Hill can understand. And we're moving in that direction. We can do more, and we will do more, I know.
Now, you have attended a number of conventions. What do you like and enjoy about the annual convention and the Four Cs?
It's important to be in community. I absolutely know from my own experience and from experience of friends and colleagues that being supported by others, being sometimes questioned by others, and being in the company of people who aren't in your same situation is important. That's where you can learn. And one of the wonderful things about NCTE members is they're friendly. They are interested in sharing what it is they're doing. They're interested in learning from other people about what those other people are doing. And the convention gives that kind of opportunity. Four Cs is the same way. For years, I was teaching at the college level and administering writing programs at the college level. And when I went to Four Cs, there were people who understood what I was doing. They knew what my challenges were. They knew how happy I could be with certain kinds of successes. They were doing the research that was important for all of us. And so being able to make both friends, professional and personal, there was important to me. So I think that there's something for everyone at a convention. And I'm hoping that those people who fund teachers to come to conventions will understand that. It is more and more difficult for teachers to get funding. But if we can, again, show the benefits, and if teachers can document the benefits of having been in a convention, there's more and more opportunity then for teachers and for faculty members to be able to come to NCTE and to Four Cs.
Well, thank you, Barbara, for everything you've done. I really appreciate you meeting with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.